cut off, isn't it? Hey viewers, my name's Kara. I'm your host for Tuesdays on the Pagan Perspective, and this week we're talking about Raymond Buckland and Neo-Wiccans and why Neo-Wiccans might not like him. Telling you right now, I don't have the answer to that question. So if that's what you were hoping for, it's not happening. Sorry. I don't know. This is kind of a multi-part topic for me. Comes from the Coffee Time 4, who says, what is the difference between Wiccans and Neo-Wiccans, and why do Neo-Wiccans not like Buckland? And then they go on to explain that this is coming up because there's a channel that they like to watch, and there's a video that they made about Buckland's Big Blue Book. Actually, it's only one thing mentioned in the video among many other things. It's a very short clip. I was under the impression that this was going to be a big, long, ranting video, and I was very nervous to even watch it because I don't like watching things like that, and then I don't like having to discuss them, so I really overly stressed myself out about this topic, and then it turned out to be not that big of a deal. She talks about it for like maybe a minute. She packs a lot of insults into that minute though, I have to say. But this person made this video where they mentioned some negative things about the Big Blue Book, and then in the comments, someone who turns out was Rob, our friend Rob, who used to be on Pagan Perspective back when he was Guardian of the Grove, had commented something, but his original comment and a bunch of the other original comments are gone. We can't see the original comments, we can only see what she replied to them, and Coffee Time pointed out one of her replies was, I don't know, I've seen some people get really upset with Buckland, I don't like him, but I'm nowhere near some other Wiccans I've talked to, mainly Neo-Wiccans, to be honest. So then Coffee Time is asking us, what is the difference between Wiccans and Neo-Wiccans, and why don't they like him? As I said, I don't have the answer to that question. But so the first thing we need to talk about is Wicca versus Neo-Wicca. What is that? Let me put my computer in a place so that I can talk freely with my hands. How do you get an Italian to stop talking? Tie their hands. Okay, so I watched Rich's video, because like I said, I was really nervous about talking about this at first, because I had hyped it up in my head. So I watched Rich's video, and I read the comments there, and one of the comments on Rich's video is great. And they said that basically to them, there are very simply two kinds of Wicca. One is the traditional lineaged Wicca, and the other is the non-traditional, solitary, not necessarily lineaged Wicca. And Buckland, in the Big Blue Book, makes a distinction between covened Wicca and solitary Wicca. And that's the only distinction that he needs to make between them. When someone first asked me, probably a year or more ago, about Neo-Wicca, it was in an ask on Tumblr. I had never heard the term before, and someone said, what do you think about Neo-Wicca? And my response at the time, having never seen or heard this term before, was, okay, if Wicca is already neo-pagan, then what is Neo-Wicca? New pagan? And to me it made no sense, and I still really don't have a firm grasp on what people mean when they use this term. But it was described to me at the time, after I posted it on Tumblr, a couple other people who had heard of it, described it to me as being a way of differentiating traditional, initiatory Wicca that is associated with any of the specific traditions, Gardnerian, Alexandrian, Algard, etc., from Wicca that is outside of any tradition, non-initiatory, basically solitary, eclectic forms. There was a group a while back, a couple of years ago, that I heard about that had yet another name for it. It was basically the same thing. It was Wicca that was non-initiatory, not part of a tradition. And there's all these different names that people are coming up with for it, and I think it's just really confusing, because you're all talking about the same thing but using different terms, then you think that you're talking about different things, and really that's not the case. I've always just said either the name of the tradition if you're talking about a tradition, or like for me, I've said that I'm eclectic and solitary, and I've never claimed to be part of a tradition. Initiates to a tradition could also end up working solitary, or they could choose to work solitary for the time being, or something like that, but in that case I think they would say I'm a solitary Gardnerian Wiccan. They wouldn't, for example, like I used to describe myself solely as a solitary eclectic Wiccan. Which is a totally different, never mind. Let's not get into that. I also want to say that in the process of getting ready to make this video, I found this great interview with Raymond Buckland because I wanted to hear a little bit about it from his words, his point of view. It's a 2-hour interview, but the whole thing isn't talking about witchcraft, not even the whole thing is the interview, but for a lot of it they're talking about his history with the theater and how he used to write screenplays and things like that, so I found that really interesting. I will put the link in the description. He talks about the Big Blue Book, and that really helped me to get an idea sort of what he thinks about it, and he also tells the story about how, you know, this is what it was, this is the religion of witchcraft that was taught to him, and then people started wanting to call it something else because they didn't want to call themselves witches because of the negative stigma with the term witch. So that's why Wicca became the name for what it is. But that's not what it was originally called. And I kind of always, I knew that, but somehow hearing him tell the story just solidified it even more in my mind, you know? So the next thing I want to talk about is Buckland, specifically the Big Blue Book. Before today, I actually hadn't read this book because by the time I had gotten to a point where I was going to, did she sneak her way into the video subversively? Are you in the frame? By the time I had gotten to the place where I was going to go to bookstores and buy books about witchcraft, I was looking for a little bit more advanced stuff, and this is a beginner book. It's a basics book. It's an introductory thing. So I personally didn't want to spend any more money on yet another beginner book. Even though it is a classic, I didn't want to spend the money on something that I felt was just going to be more of the same to me because I had already been past that point. But I found a free copy of it online. Thank you so much to whoever put that up there. So I read it today. Well, I read the first several chapters and then I skimmed through the rest of it, just trying to get an idea for what this person was specifically criticizing in their video, and trying to get a feel for what I think of it. And I actually think it looks like a really great book. As I said, it's a basic book. It is obviously for beginners. And as he talks about more in depth in that interview, please do, if you have the time, listen to that while you're doing something else. I was making jewelry while I did it. You don't have to watch it per se. You just listen to it. He talks about how it was written because there were all these different covens. It was when they were kind of just starting to be open, and then you had all these people who wanted to be witches but had no formal training, had no one to learn from, and so they were just pulling from all over the place, which is okay to do. Like, you can do that, but then people ask me about this all the time. How do you then work in a group together if everyone has different beliefs and everything like that? So this book was written to give people a common starting place, to make sure that everyone had all this basic information, and then if you went into a group and you knew nothing about these people other than you had all read and worked through the Big Blue Book, then you all knew something about what the other knew. You had an expectation that you could hold people to because they had gone through the same thing you had gone through. It's a book of lessons, and it's meant to be basic introduction. There's a lot of good stuff in there, though. There's a lot packed in there. It's one of those books that touches on the very basics of many, many different things. And then, like I say about the Solitary Witch, it's many, many different things in a very basic format. And if you want to learn more, you have to get more in depth into those specific things with different books, different authors, yada yada. But there's a lot packed into that book. And then, like Rich said in his video, you just use whatever works for you and don't worry about any of it that doesn't, which is what we all do anyway. And it's what Buckland actually says to do with the book. Multiple times in the book he talks about how there is no one way that is going to be right for every witch. It's meant to be a starting guide for people who had nowhere to go, had nowhere to start. And there are still people like that, and those are the people that are asking all of us who make videos about it, where do I start? This is what this book was. And again, as he talks about in the interview, he talks about how at the time there were countries that had banned witchcraft, and somehow his book got into those countries. And so if not for that book, those countries would have had no knowledge whatsoever of witchcraft as a religion. Now, I think he also knows, just from the interview I listened to, from other things I've read, I feel like Buckland is aware that there are problems with the things that he wrote in the past, there are problems with the things he was taught in the past by other witches, and there are problems with what he was then teaching other people as a result of what he had been taught. I think he's aware of that. Just like this video that we're talking about was 4 years old right now, this book is how many years old? Wicca is how many years old? Views change. And while there are definitely elements to this book that I don't personally agree with for my personal practice, there are things, ways that he wrote certain things that I could do without, that I wish, authors in the future would not do anymore. These are all ways that we can improve as we move into the future. But I think that for what it is and what it was at the time, it's a good resource, and I think that people can still use it today as a good resource. So the last thing I want to touch on is just the way that we go about disagreeing with people. I took a course called History of the Movies, where my theater director was the professor, and he was teaching us about the movies, history of film, and then we went up into about the time of Citizen Kane. And over, something that he was telling us to remember is that just because you don't like something doesn't mean it's bad. Just because you like something doesn't mean it's good. People like things all the time that are actually bad for what they are, and people dislike things that are really good. You may not want to sit through 3 hours of Lawrence of Arabia. You may not like that film, but it's a good film. On the flip side, you might really enjoy some movies that are not good films. That's okay. You may dislike Raymond Buckland, but he was still really important for the community. And the thing is, the person who made this video acknowledges that. She says, it's a classic, I'm making myself read it because it's a classic, I know so many people have read it, yada yada, but I just don't like the guy. That's okay, and I think we just need to be able to differentiate between, for example, when this person asked us this question, when Coffee Time gave us this topic, I didn't know whether they were implying that Neo-Wiccans hate Buckland's work, like the Big Blue Book, or that Neo-Wiccans hate Raymond Buckland as a person. Those are different things. But just in this case, in movies, in life, just because you don't like something doesn't mean it's bad. Just because you like it doesn't mean it's good. You may like things that are good and you may dislike things that are bad, but that does not, how you feel about something doesn't automatically make it good or bad. And we are always, of course, allowed to disagree. It's perfectly fine to dislike something. It's perfectly fine to like something that a bunch of other people dislike, as long as we respect other people's views. Obviously, there are certain circumstances, but you know what I'm trying to say. As for the few specific things that she pointed out in her video, again, 4 years ago, so really, things may have changed. I know my videos that I made 4 years ago, there are a lot of things that I've learned since then, a lot of ways that my mind has been opened and expanded, and I've learned so much and grown so much. So I'm not trying to pick too much on what was said 4 years ago, but just in case anyone else is curious about the exercises, the things like practice drawing a pentagram. Like I said, this was meant for people who were just kind of getting interested in it, or people who had been practicing but didn't really have a place to go from. Some of those people may have never drawn a pentagram before. Or, like I learned in school, the way that we draw a star was starting from the bottom left-hand corner. So if I was doing it so that you could see, it would go like this. This is the way that we would draw a star. That's how I was taught in school. But in invoking, I forget which element it is, honestly, because I don't know all of them by heart. So I definitely, when I learned all these, I had to practice drawing them on paper, and what he's done is just given you a space to do it in the book. The invoking pentagram that I always remember is the opposite, where I would usually start here. You would start at the top and go down to that left corner and then finish connecting the sides of the pentagram from there. People may have never done that before. I don't think that's such an absurd thing to have in a workbook. But again, it's basic, it's beginner. Someone who's really advanced may not need that, and so it might seem silly to you, but it wasn't for people who were really advanced, or it was for people who were, that were just trying to learn to make sure that they knew what everyone else knew. And then as far as the questions go, it was kind of just like, it seems like the questions were really just reading comprehension. It was just a way of being able to say, okay, I really did read that chapter and pay attention. I didn't zone out during that. I hit all the main points. However, she did have a point about the green thing, because in the text of the book itself, he does say, some people say the Book of Shadows has to be black, others say green, others say brown. And then when he asks the question, the answer is given as green. And I think that might just be an editing error, like maybe that's originally how he wrote it and then he added the other things in later and then never changed the answer, because he doesn't ever say in the text of the book, at least not that I saw. If you can find it, it's in lesson 5, let me know. I couldn't find it anywhere where he says, like, his group uses green, and that's what he was trying to ask. The only thing I found was where he said it can be black, it can be green, it can be brown, it doesn't matter, it's whatever's up to you. So I think that was an editing error, but in any case, that's a really small thing to point out. But again, in her video, she freely admits that a lot of it is just that she doesn't like Buckland. And if you don't like someone, it's gonna be a little bit harder to like anything that they've created. So to wrap this all up for you, why do Neo-Wiccans hate Buckland? I don't know. I don't even necessarily know who they are. By some of the definitions that I've been given, I would be considered a member of this group, but I don't use the term. So my advice on that count would be find someone who identifies with this term, who actually uses it to describe themselves and their path, and ask them. You might want to start by asking the person who made the video, because I feel like she might know why she dislikes him, even though she didn't give any specific examples in that video. 4 years later, maybe she has a more objective view on it now, maybe she could say. Maybe someone else out there who identifies as Neo-Wiccan could enlighten us as to whether it really is all Neo-Wiccans who dislike Buckland and or his work, or if it just happens to be some people dislike him who also happen to be Neo-Wiccan. Because I always hesitate to say that an entire group agrees on anything. because that's just so difficult to find. Until next week, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for listening. Please check out that interview if you want to hear a little bit more about what Mr. Buckland has to say. And I have to say also, if you listen to that interview and then start reading through the Big Blue Book, it's so funny because you can just hear his voice and you can hear the laughter in his voice when you read like the little jokes that he makes, and so funny. I'll also put a link in the description to my video when I went to Lilydale and he happened to be there, and I got him on camera a little bit giving a lecture, and I posed with his Corvette. It was a big day for me. Alright, I'll see you next time. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.